What happens when your worst fear becomes your reality? Hi, I'm Brent Cassidy. Welcome to the Nightmare Success In and Out podcast, where we explore how to overcome your fears and nightmares to set yourself free. We're going to be exploring this topic with guys I was in Leavenworth with and others who served time at other prisons. We're going to be talking about life before prison, life in prison, life out of prison. These stories can be inspiring, sometimes sad. There's some humor, but hopefully you can come away with a nugget of something that'll help you knock down some of the prisons you built up in your own mind. I am really excited about my guest today because she has a lot that she has done in her life that is going to be a book, I'm sure. But we're going to talk about some homeless stuff. We're going to be talking about addiction. We're going to be talking prison. We're going to be talking recovery, and Jenn has even coined a phrase of lifestyle recovery solutions, which I think we'll talk about as we go along here. So Jenn Henry is my guest today. Jenn, welcome.
Hi, Brett. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to have you here. So you have been in all these different things. You are that person. And we were just talking before you go on. I thought your story was incredible and very interesting, fascinating when we were on the phone the other day, but I didn't know that the whole homeless aspect was part of this. I want to get into that. So, Jenn, where did you grow up, and as a kid, what was life like for you as little Jenn? What was your home life? Was mom, dad, married, siblings? What was it all like?
Brent, it was like growing up. So I grew up in Riverside, California, born and raised. I still live in Riverside. Growing up, I hated it because I didn't know downtown Riverside. I only knew our little corner, which was technically Paris slash Mead Valley. And it was on the very southeast corner of Riverside County. And hmm, I grew up on a horse ranch. I
Yeah.
had both of my parents. They both did okay for themselves. My dad made, six figures a year, and my mom brought in a pretty hefty chunk. And I didn't know to need, let alone want. I had horses, I had chores, I had responsibilities, but I was all alone. My parents were an incredible example of what it looks like to have a partner in life, somewhat what I thought was what it was supposed to look like when you chose someone, for it to be you and that person against the world. And
Yeah.
it was a conversation in my house that when my mom and I wouldn't get along, as growing up, my mom was an alcoholic, but she was a functional alcoholic. But the reason that she drank was because she was a bipolar.
Mm.
She suffered from bipolar. Now
Which is
that
so tough
excuse my
for people.
excuse my dogs, by the way. We are at home
Oh no,
and
I
the
just
life is in
I
session.
told you, Jenn. That'll just make it more comforting to people listening that we're just at your home,
Yes,
and we are
you
just
are.
at your
You
home.
are. And it is difficult. And so as a young child, we don't know what's going on. We just know that this is our world. This is our
Right.
life, and this is how we're being programmed. We don't even know we're being programmed. We're just being told all of these things, and we're seeing all of these things as examples. And what I had was a mother who I knew, I suspected loved me, but I don't think she knew how to love me because she didn't know how to love herself. And of course,
Hmm.
that's something I learned later on in life. But in the meantime, I was a confused little girl who kept asking my mom what was wrong with her. She would be happy go lucky 1 second, and then asking me to do something 1 second, and then mad at me because I wasn't doing something else, and then would be screaming at me, and then I would be crying, and then she would be crying, and then she would be trying to tell me, oh my God, I'm such a terrible mother, I'm so sorry, and then apologizing, asking me to forgive her, and then wanting to play with me and asking me why I wasn't playing with her or laughing with her. And I finally, one day, I was like 7, and I was like, Mom, what is wrong with you? what is
Hmm.
what is wrong with you? And she finally went and got some help, and she got on medication. Unfortunately, she still found her release with alcohol in the evenings.
Hmm.
I had My dad was an amazing guy. He was a hustler. He was always someone who went after what he wanted, who always was in the groove and in the game and shaking and moving. And to me, for the beginning of my life, he was my hero. And he always told me, Jen, you can do anything that you set your mind to. You can be anybody. You can do anything you want to do in this life. And then I had my mom, who would have alcoholic and bipolar fits. and would tell me that she can't believe she almost died having me, that I was such a waste of breath, that I was someone who, she was not well. She didn't mean those things. I know now she didn't
Jen,
mean those.
did your dad, like, was he aware of and talk to you about how your mom was doing, or were you together on this, that, mom's not right?
Well,
Your
that's
dad's your hero.
exactly.
Is he helping out? Is it like, how did that
No.
all work?
No, as a matter of fact, I remember one evening there was an episode, and I don't tell all this to air all my family secrets, and they're probably not thrilled that I share these pieces of life, but they are pieces of my life. They are experiences that I had to
Yeah, it's
go
your
through to
story.
become who I am. And I am so grateful that I got to witness these things and carry this belief system for as long as I did, because then I got to heal that. And now I get to support others in healing themselves. But no, Brent, actually what happened was I would bring up to my dad, Dad, you see how she is in the evenings. You see, can't we leave? Why can't we go somewhere else? Why do we have to live with her? And he said, you know what, Jen? It was your and my mother's love for each other that brought you into this world. And you're going to grow up one day and you're going to start a family, and it's going to be you and your husband or wife against the world. And of course, at the time, it was 30 years ago, we're talking about husband and wife. And
Yeah.
he said, you're going to meet a husband and you're going to start a family, and it's going to be you and your husband against the world. And then it's going to be just me and your mom left here. And so it's got to be me and your mom against the world. And I
Mm.
need you to understand that. And so there was a lot that happened there that was imprinted in me. One, I don't matter. Two, I am not part of the tribe. Three, I am left to fend for myself, and I have to one day find someone who will put up with my shit no matter what.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it doesn't matter how I act, because I can act like that and they'll still put up with me. And if they don't, then they don't love me.
Mm.
But at the same time, I just felt that I needed to find that person, and I needed to that. And so my entire young adult life, I sought that. I sought being accepted. I wanted to be accepted. I wanted to fit in. I wanted you to like me. I would be whoever you needed me to be so that I could be your
Was
friend.
that what your high school and school was like? Is you were trying to
Absolutely.
please, you were trying to get friends and please and do, and yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But as a young girl, I was in private school and I did really, really well. And I was too smart for my own good. I tested high in the top 3% of the John Hopkins test. And then I tested the top 2% of that. And then they threw me in public school,
Mm.
where I was completely bored out of my mind all through class, and I would go hang out in the bathroom. But the other girls hanging out in the bathroom weren't there because they were bored, because they knew everything already and they could ace the test without cracking a book. They were in there because they wanted to escape. And that's something that we had in common, was that I wasn't okay in my own skin. I didn't know how to be or who to be, or what this whole purpose of life was, and why I was having to repeat all this information and this waste of time. And this just wasn't it, right? So F it. I don't want to be a part of it. Stop the world. I want off.
Mm-hmm.
And I did. And by middle school, I was already beginning to check out. I started smoking cigarettes at 12. I started smoking weed at 13. By 15, I was doing coke and ecstasy and acid
Was it
and
easy,
smoking
Jen, to
weed.
find people in that world? So that, because obviously I can just tell by your story to this point, you were a kid that wanted to escape. You were a smart kid, but you were struggling with trying to figure out your mom, trying to understand where you fit into that. But the escape, was it hard to find people that were wanting that same thing, or was it just because it was a drug world? Those people were all kind of, like you said, looking for the escape.
Oh no, babe, I'm a manifesting machine. When I want something, it just seems to. And when you start to walk down a path, you start to meet other characters walking down that path. That's just the way it
Yeah,
is. I do a
yeah,
lot of relationship work, and when I'm ta- when I think of someone wanting to meet their person, and I think of someone wanting to get that job, or I think about someone wanting to have that life. Okay, what are you doing to have that life? What are you doing to have that relationship? Are you going the places that that future person would be? Are you in alignment with them? And
right,
that's really what it but the gist of my work is around personal connection, not just
yeah.
connection, not connection to other people, because we don't have a problem, really, at least myself, I don't have a problem seeking outside, like taking care of other people, making sure they're okay, making sure, because
Because
it
that
makes me
fills you
feel
up.
good.
Yeah,
It does. However, if I'm not filling my own cup,
yeah.
right? If I don't know who I am, if I don't know what I want, if I don't set boundaries around what it is that I need in my life and honoring my yeses and nos, right? Saying yes to the things that matter to me, that feed me, that fill me, and no to the things that are sucking me dry, then I'm never going to be able to have that balance or be in
Hmm.
alignment with where I'm looking to go. And yeah, that's
Yeah, no, you can get that's how a lot of people get off of where their plan is. People say they have a goal and they have a plan and then they have to take action to that. But the problem is if you take action to that and you get it unbalanced, then what you're saying is if you say yes to everything, then that means that you're not doing the most passionate thing because you're drifting and getting distracted. But I'm interested in this because you said you were getting and basically stepping, Jen, into all these worlds of drugs. How did you get into a homeless situation at the age of like 16?
I was getting ready to I reached out
Because your
to a
family,
friend.
you had horses and
Oh
private
yeah,
school, and so how did in the
absolutely.
world does that happen?
By my own hand, sir, by my own hand. And I think that accountability and responsibility for our own actions is one of the first steps to being able to, is one of the most important steps of being able to actually create a life you love and that you're proud of and that you respect yourself for and that others actually respect you for. Because when I totally scrolled off right now in my mind. So when we are, I want to
Well,
step back a minute.
here's what I'm curious about, Jen. Did to go homeless in a certain time period? Because homelessness fascinates me because there's a lot of people that are homeless that it's a totally different stereotype than what you would like. You and I were talking about Michael Henderson before. Um, why did
I can get
why did you see
specific.
it as an option?
I can get specific. It wasn't really an option. It wasn't something that came about because I chose to do that. It happened as a result of my choices. And my choices were to escape. My choices were to numb. And that is what the universe was going to provide for me if that's what I wanted. And
Mm-hmm.
when I started to notice, right, it started out with just having some fun on on the weekend with my friends. And then it became every day we were smoking weed between classes or even breaking, leaving class to go smoke weed in the bathroom. And then it was we were having to get Coke before the midwinter dance. And then it was, well, let's do Coke again next weekend. And let's do Coke again at that party. And then so I was going to score Coke from a friend. And she says, I don't know why you waste your money on that crap. And I was like, what do you mean? And she's like, I don't know why you don't do speed. And I was like, oh, I've heard horror stories. I would never touch that. I've heard too much bad shit. She's like, oh my gosh, it's the same thing as Coke. It's just cheaper and it lasts longer.
Mm.
And I bought it because I wanted to believe her. And so I remember, I'll never forget the first night that I went over and I hung out and I was smoking speed out of a light bulb and I never stopped, never stopped. It was one of those things where that was the ultimate escape. I did not care for the first time about anything. I didn't care what you thought. I didn't care what I thought. I didn't care what the rules were. I didn't care if somebody didn't like me. I didn't care. And it was the most freeing experience up until that point that I've ever had. And that is what I sought, the freedom. That's what I
Mm.
thought I was going to get from that was the freedom. Well, it gave it to me right out onto the streets because I lost my mind. The reason I started injecting meth and using meth intravenously was because I could stay sane that way. I couldn't stay sane when I would smoke it. And I kept going
Mm.
to mental hospitals and mental hospital after mental hospital because I was hearing things and seeing things. And to this day, I have to remind myself of certain things not being real. To
Yeah.
this day, I am schizoaffective because of the
So it made
result of
you
being up
extremely paranoid.
up for months, starving for months, instinctively breaking into places and or on into yards and using hoses to drink
Yeah.
water like a dog, like just lapping it up like a
So
dog.
when you were
And
homeless, though, Jen, were you around the area that you were familiar with, or were you somewhere else?
the area that I was familiar with was dirt. It was orange groves. There was nothing up there at that time. In the area that I
Mm-hmm.
grew up in, it was hundreds and thousands of acres of orange groves. And so I was downtown Riverside and East Side Riverside. And as
Mm-hmm.
a young white girl, ignorant, naive white girl in the streets of downtown Riverside and East Side, there were things that I experienced that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy.
Mm.
And I don't hold a resentment or a grudge against any of those people because that's the lifestyle they were living before I ever came around. But I did lose my mind because I didn't know. I was in the twilight zone. I really felt like I didn't understand. My brain exploded. That's why I was in and out of mental hospitals too, because not only was I on drugs, not only was I not able to be in my right mind, not only did I find, was I also manic depressive bipolar, had been on and off mental health meds, psych meds.
Did you know
And
that at that time? Did you
I
know
did.
that you're?
My parents first took me to the psych around 13.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe it was because of my drug use, and like I was doing tons of ecstasy, I was doing tons of acid, and so I
Mm-hmm.
was completely gone, and I wasn't okay, and I was having fits, and the tantrums that I threw as a spoiled child were nothing in comparison to what was happening when I would come down
Yeah.
and have to feel again. And I was angry and mean and horrible, and I stopped caring, and they saw that, and so they tried to get me help, but there was nothing really that they could do because I wasn't in a place where I could hear anything. I had to go through what I had to go through, and
So
that's
when
really
you,
hard for a lot of people to hear.
oh yeah, because that's a tough, dark road, and you're lonely on that road. And so when you were on the streets, is that did you were you all? You said you were in and out of. Were you in and out of being arrested and jail time and those things when that time period was in your life?
The mental hospitals are usually where they took me. I would be on 72-hour holds until finally at 17 I was put on a 2-week hold, and it was 50, I was 5250, and which is a 5150 is a 72-hour hold, and a 5250 is a 10, I believe it's 10 days to 2 weeks hold. And they were going to keep me longer, but I was able to talk myself out of it. And when my mom came to pick me up, she begged them not to let me go. She looked right in my face and was like, "She is not herself. That is not her." And they had me on 1,500 milligrams of Depakote on
Mm,
top of like 3 other medications. That was enough to put down an elephant or a full grown man, at least,
mm-hmm.
right? And I'm a little 17-year-old, 120-pound girl who is on so much medication that she shouldn't even be able to walk, let alone have a conversation. And she just looked straight in my face and saw that I was not ready. And they said, "There's nothing we can do. She's been released." We didn't even make it home, and I was out of the car.
Were there periods of time where you tried to get right and clean, or was it
I was
just
clean
one
from 18 to
spiral?
22. From 18 to
18 to 22.
22, I had gotten clean. I'd gotten arrested at 18. And at the time, there was a program called Prop 37, Prop 13, Prop 36, Prop 36, Prop 36. And
A lot of
what it
numbers.
allowed, it was Prop 36. It allowed us to claim drug addiction as our reasoning. And as long as it was only drug charges or drug related charges, you were accepted into that program. You could do an outpatient program. And if you did the outpatient program, you were released and your charges were dropped. If you got 3 chances, the first time was an outpatient, second time was an outpatient, third time was an inpatient, and that's it. And if you didn't do that, you went. So I ended up going to outpatient, getting arrested again, going to outpatient, getting arrested again, and then going to inpatient and staying for 67 of the 90 days because uh, long story short, they had changed the law, changed the requirements of the Prop 36. And so by the time I got to 67 days, even though I had left, I still met my requirements.
Mm-hmm.
And while I was in there, I met a young man who had been into rehab 9 times, who had a 6-year-old son. And I just thought, well, he Mr. Prince Charming. So he
Mm-hmm.
and I started hooking up. And so I was together with him for 4 years. And then I was doing AA and NA. I was actively involved in meetings. I had a sponsor. I was working steps, but I
How did that
still didn't.
feel at that time when
At
when
that
you
time,
doing
I
all
thought
those things?
I had gotten my cosmetology license. I had started working. I was making 5, 6 grand a month at the time, not even thinking about it. I had no overhead because I was living with my parents
Mm.
and my boyfriend in our back house in the property, the horse property. And I thought I
You
was
were always so
amazing.
darn smart. You know, that's the
I
thing, Jen,
I
that's
thought,
interesting about all this. You were a brilliant girl. You were just walking down dark paths.
and I didn't know who I was because when the shit hit the fan and I ended up having a miscarriage, and I didn't know how to process that because I didn't even know I was pregnant. I found out because of the miscarriage. I didn't tell him, and I held resentment for about 6 months. Our
Mm.
relationship got really ugly because it had already been ugly. He had relapsed on alcohol. I kicked him out. He left, and then ended up coming back begging for forgiveness. I brought him back. And when I brought him back, it turned out that he had been sleeping with someone else. And dun dun dun, guess what? She
Mm.
was pregnant. So
Mm.
so then all of a sudden I find out that all of this that I'd gone through had been for nothing. And not only are we not having a child together, but they are. And she moved in the
Wow.
next week.
Oh
And so
man.
there was only so much. I handled his relapse, I handled the miscarriage, but when it came down to it, when it came down to that, I couldn't. I still didn't have enough spiritual connection to self. I still didn't have enough foundation. I still didn't have enough coping skills to be able to really deal with life on life's terms. And I ran and numbed and I relapsed hard. And I knew that this time I wasn't going to be the victim. I wasn't going to be the one that got jumped or gang raped or held hostage or robbed or any of it. I wasn't.
Hmm.
I wasn't necessarily going to be doing those things, but I was definitely not going to get crossed ever again. And so it was a little darker those last 3 years. 22 to 25 was a much darker place for me. And I'm just grateful that I was arrested when I was because of the way that my lifestyle had been escalating towards drugs
Well,
and
let's
crime
let's talk a little
and
bit
bad
about that.
behavior.
When you got arrested, um, was it like you? How did you feel about that? Did you feel like, oh my God, this is horrible? I'm going, I'm going to get convicted. I'm going to jail, or were you worn out?
Both probably, but at the
Yeah.
same time, I had been there, I had done that, I knew what I was looking at. And so all I could do in the moment was make sure I was setting myself up. And of course, because the room that we were arrested in was in my name, I had a parole violation, and the other people all were able to bail out except for me. And so there was a lot of anger and resentment. But I had had my drugs on me. I had taken my drugs and my needle into the jail with me. We use our female purse, if you will.
Hmm.
And I was able to take those in with me. And so I walked into jail this last time with an 8 ball and a rig. And so
Mm.
I set myself up. My bunkie, who my cellmate, she was a 6'2", bald headed black stud broad, 250, maybe 300 pounds. And thank goodness I had what I had because we were able to get along right away because of that. Once I trusted her and I felt comfortable opening up about that. She used to help me get set up. I got what I needed and I was actually okay. And I was like, just this is another day. This is just part of the process. This is the life that I'm living. And then the
How much
drugs
time
ran.
were you looking at, Jen, at that point?
At that point, I was looking at 6 to 8 years.
Wow.
I would just say 7 years. And I didn't really care. I didn't really care. I'd already been there. I'd already done that. I got out of prison. I'd already been to prison once and I got out worse than I went in. I was only out
Hmm.
67 days before I got rearrested.
Right.
And when I ran out, that's when life really hit. And I just had this moment of awareness where I finally stepped out of myself and saw myself. As I said, I had run out. I was dry. I was starting to have to feel and I was coming down and I did fine when I was high, but when I was coming down, I was not okay. I was
Hmm.
the devil. And I said some crass words to my bunkie and spit on her. And she picked me up off the second bunk, threw me in the corner and threw a Bible at me and said, "You need God, bitch."
Mm.
And I picked up the Bible and threw it in the corner of my shelf and acted like, MF this and MF that and MF you. Crawled up in my bunk and fell asleep. I probably woke up a couple days later and everyone was at day room. And so I immediately go up and I get my rig and I start pushing and pulling to see if there's I pull blood into it and I push it back in just to see if there's any way I can get any more drugs out of this needle. And at that moment I just dissociated and I saw myself. I But I don't think up until that point in my life I had ever really taken any I never really had any understanding of introspection.
And
And
when
I
you
never
say you
had.
saw yourself, what were you? What did you see? What was your? How would you have seen yourself?
So I'm actually seeing myself sitting on this bunk covered with my blanket,
Hmm.
blood marks, needle marks bleeding out of my ankle, um, gaunt, skinny, dead looking, and just so sick and not
Mm.
well. And I just felt this overwhelming sadness for who I'd become and what I was looking at. And I just wanted to help her and be there for her. But I was just so heartbroken for what I was looking at.
Hmm.
And in that moment, I kind of, as I realized what I'm looking at, I'm back in my body and I'm feeling the pain and I'm feeling the misery and going through DTs. I'm going through all of it and I'm having to have that human experience again. And I look up to where I kind of had been seeing myself, and I see that Bible. And I'm by no means a Bible thumping Christian. I would more consider myself a Buddhist than I would consider myself a Christian.
Okay.
But I would say
Spiritual.
that I I believe that when we are meant to know something, God, our higher power, the universe, the powers that be will find a way to tell you what you need to know, as long as you ask the right questions. And I remember seeing that version of me sitting there, and I was like, what have you done? What are you doing? Like what is happening to you? And I look up and I see that Bible, and I get out of bed and I grab the Bible and I open it up. And I'm paraphrasing here, but it talked about gird up the loins of your mind and be sober and rest in the assurance that your faith in God will restore you to sanity. Trust that, you just have faith that you're going to be okay. And in that moment, I knew that I knew that I knew. And I don't know how I knew, but I knew that I was going to be okay. No matter what, here I was. I had been through the more than anyone I'd ever met or even heard about in just a few years on the streets. And yet here I was sitting, breathing, and I'm okay. And what am I going to do about it? Because obviously, whether I want to be here or not, I'm here. So now what? And it was that moment, I'll never forget it, being for the first time in my own skin, knowing that no matter what, I was going to be okay. And I just had this knowing, and I've had this knowing since, that I know that when I take the next right indicated step, when I listen and ask the right questions and find the right answers for myself, not for what everybody else wants from me, not for the judge, not from the dealer, not from my mom or dad, not from the teacher, not from the best friend or the coworker or the boss, when I check in with myself and I decide what I need for myself and I move forward and take action towards that, I know that I am honoring my highest self. I know that I'm honoring that God inside of me. I know that that's how I will reach enlightenment and be able to transcend all of this earthly bullshit that we all have to deal with every single day. We have
Right.
absolutely no control over what someone else is meant to learn from this experience in life.
Wow. Amen.
All I have is the ability to choose my experience, and I'm the only one who gets to determine what that is.
I
And
think it's
I have
interesting, Jen. I think it's interesting though that how people come to that. The people who talk about it the way that you're talking about it, because I had a similar experience. You know when you are there, and it seems like everything changes after that. And you knowing that you were going to be okay, regardless if it was going to be the worst of the worst and the most unknown or scary that you had to go through. Somehow you gained the confidence to know that you didn't need to reach for that escape, that you were actually just going to survive it because you had an inner confidence. And I think that's really cool. Of however that happens, or however we get there, sometimes hitting the bottom, so many people are so afraid to hit rock bottom because they don't know what that is or where it is. And sometimes that's when everything's revealed to you, that you gain something intangible from that gives you the survival tools to get to your next world. And it sounds like it's just like you were sitting in a place that was so awful, and you're looking in the mirror and you're thinking, that's not me. That can't be me. And then you put it all together. Very interesting.
And I'd love to say that it was happily ever after that, and I made all these amazing choices for
Nothing's
myself
ever
and
happily
life
ever after.
changed. And and I have to
That'll
admit
be in the
that
movie.
I had the best of I had the best of intentions, but throughout the time I was serving, I got sucked back in. The energy that I was surrounded by was negative and dark
Sure.
and
Sure.
and manipulative and
Claustrophobic.
ugh, all the things, right?
Yeah.
And so it eventually, of course, I got sucked back into that lifestyle and disconnected. And I realized, and I ended up getting high in prison, selling drugs in prison, selling tobacco in prison. And before my release, I was a few months before my release, I was drug tested because I didn't hold my shit together very well in group one day. And it was very obvious that I was not well in the head. And so they ran a drug test, and of course I tested dirty. Now I thank God that that's all that's happened, right?
Sure.
Because I was
Yeah.
doing some,
Other
to
thing.
get caught bringing stuff in to the prison,
It's a
that
big
was a
deal.
big deal.
Yeah.
And being the visitor that was actually bringing the stuff in, it's been way too long for them to do anything about it now, thank God. But I, I thought I was hard. I thought I was badass. Like I thought that I've made it. And
Yeah.
I
You're
thought
living the prison
when I
life.
got 100%. And when I got that dirty test and I got everything taken away from me, I thought, you know what, Jen? You're having to suffer consequences in prison because you're still an asshole. What is going on? And that's when I really started my healing journey. And that's when I really started realizing I needed to take accountability for my actions. And if this is the life I wanted to be living, I might as well just commit another crime and stay here because there's no sense in processing out to process back in. And I thought that's not what I wanted. I fought for that 6 month program. I fought in county for months to get that 6 month program. And I'm going to do my best to make it work. And I'm going to try and learn how to live life on life's terms. And I'm going to try to learn how to cope. And I'm going to try to learn how to feel these feelings that everybody keeps talking about that I've been suppressing for the last 20 years. And when I was released and I was able to go to prison, able to go to the inpatient rehab, I was on all kinds of medication still because it was a stipulation of my parole that I be on these meds because I was a risk to myself and others. And when I asked my therapist, my psychiatrist,
Was part of the meds for your bipolar treatment
yes,
too? Okay.
it was. But you know, Brent, it was, and especially now that I know what I know and I'm as educated as I am, I find it devastating that when I look back at my eating habits when I was a child, I would come home from school and I would have a bowl or two of goldfish crackers. I would have multiple handfuls of red vines. I would have 2 or 3 Pepsis.
Okay.
And then they were wondering why I was not able to focus, bouncing off the walls, not able
Yeah.
to, right? Doing too much, being too much. And I just find it interesting that not once in all of the treatment plans they tried to create for me, where they focused on what I was eating, how much my body was moving, what my thoughts were, and addressing the where those came from, right? None of that was addressed. And so when I work with now, it's recognizing those things. I'm just so grateful to do the work I do because obviously that should have been the first step. Obviously that was something that should have been addressed. And we just didn't have that education back then about functional medicine. In any case, when I was released, it was important to me as they started to try and teach me all this. You know, I'm in rehab and we're doing group and we're in group from 9 to 4. And they're trying to get us to feel these feelings and make plans for ourselves and create this vision of what our life could possibly be like. But I'm still so messed up in the head and I'm still so foggy and still unable to feel because of all of these meds.
Yeah.
That I had no way to answer that question honestly. And if I was going to get the kind of results I was looking for and learn how to feel and be in a safe space, I couldn't be on meds to do that, at least not this much. In my mind, in my heart, in my gut, as I continued to check in with what I needed, because that's when I began that journey, like what would be right for me. I needed to get off of them. And when I brought it up to my doctors, they said, oh, no, remember, it's a stipulation of your parole. And I was heartbroken because I knew that I knew what I needed. And I was finally learning to trust myself against anyone else.
Just you.
No one else knows what's right for us. No one. It is our responsibility to seek out the information that is for us. And that's what I was trying to do. And I had to do that by being able to feel, even if it was uncomfortable, even if I hated it, even if it wasn't necessarily safe.
So when did you feel like you had overcome the hill that you were climbing?
Hill, let's see. Well, I would say that we are on a journey, and that if we look at a topographical map, the United States and the world is very up and down all over the place. And I still, to this day, will suffer bouts of disconnection. And by that, I mean hardcore depression, raging anxiety, stress to the max around being so overwhelmed with really not that much to do, but not knowing where to start, that I'll be on the couch for 3 days. Those still exist. I still have those moments. But instead of completely checking out, I make sure that what I have in place are things called non-negotiables. And over the last decade, there are certain things that I found that I need to have in place because when they're not there, I'm not there. So
well, let's talk a little bit about that, because it's been about 10 years since you got out, and tell me a little bit about that. When you got out of prison, what were your first steps of getting back into a world that you felt like you could live in?
It was definitely a process.
After that point, I mean, Jen, you had lived in an incredible existence of a lot of things going on in your life.
I'm super grateful that when I was clean during those few years, late teens, early 20s, that I was able to decide on something for myself and create a trade and learn a trade. And I never thought that I would do it forever. I never thought it would be something I loved this much, but it fits right into my codependent personality around needing to make people feel good about themselves. And so I've been in the transformation industry for 20 years now because I love when people can sit in my chair and come in feeling like crap and then they leave feeling like $1 million. That's everything to me.
Mm-hmm.
And, and so I still had that and I still had my license. And when I was in rehab, I actually had a sponsor or a friend of mine that was allowed to take me to class at the end of my like as I was transitioning out, and we had work program at the end of the rehab stay, the residential treatment. She was able to take me to get recertified as an educator for a color line that I used to work for. And so immediately I started setting myself up for being able to open my own business again and run my own run what I needed to as far as my rent a booth or run classes.
Mm-hmm.
When I was released, my parents actually allowed me to come back into their house with rent, same as renting a room. It was just
Mm-hmm.
easier for me to do it from them. They charged me $550 a month straight out. And so I had to get hustling straight out. And when I started, so I went and I rented a booth and she gave me 2 weeks to start. So she gave me a 1 week start where she only charged me commission on that week. And then that next week I started my booth rent. And so I sat and I waited and I rebuilt my clientele. And while I was doing that, I had also, one of my non-negotiables had become movement. And so while I was in that rehab, if we back up a little bit, while I was in that rehab, I'm coming off this medication and I'm not okay. I'm coming out of my skin. I'm having to go to group every day. I'm sweating, I'm cramping, I'm shitting excuse my French, but I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I'm not okay. And I'm having to excuse myself. I ended up getting a couple days to completely like just start, because in the first couple days it wasn't that bad. And as I started to detox, because I'm on benzodiazepines, I'm on hardcore sedatives, I'm on Neurontin and different seizure medications. And I'm slowly detoxing myself, but it's still no fun. And as I started to come back to life, after group, I was still totally wasted. And we had an old treadmill in our rec room. And in this rec room, everyone after group is trying to relax, watch TV, play cards, talk on the phone. And here I come. And I don't know if you've ever heard an old rickety treadmill, but they are like listening to my chihuahua bark, like
Uh-huh.
loud, obnoxious times 100. And
I'm
I
sure
had to fight
everybody
a couple
loved you in
times.
the rec
Oh,
room.
they were thrilled. And they were thrilled to let me know how thrilled they were. And so
Sure.
it was the first time in my life that I actually stood up for what I needed for my wellness, to be
Yeah.
okay. To, and I had to physically fight for it. And I feel like that set me a really good foundation for being able to fight for what I need, no matter what anybody else thought. No one else was paying my bills. No one else was making sure that I
Mm-hmm.
was okay. No one else was making sure that I had to make sure I was okay. And so I started everyone knew after group I was going to be on that treadmill. So they just waited. They just waited to do whatever they needed to do that couldn't be interrupted by noise. And I was so grateful for that because it was the first time that there were actually people in the community that were also on my side.
Yeah.
And as I started to do this movement and as I started to get out and get to go visit home and got home, I started running every day. And then I started lifting weights. And then I started doing body weight exercises and lifting weights and doing HIIT programs. And then I started running a boot camp. And then
Mm.
I started learning about food and balancing my gut and all of the things that go along with that and balancing the chemicals in my brain. And I started realizing that how good I felt and how capable I felt and how I hadn't thought of disconnecting in months. And then months turned into years. And I realized, and I started looking around, and everybody around me was falling like flies, relapsing, going back to prison, running back to, their exes or their drug dealers or
Mm-hmm.
whoever, any way that they could to escape, losing their jobs. And it devastated me and I felt so helpless. And I realized that that wasn't something that, while I couldn't necessarily change their lives for them, I could absolutely figure out what the heck I was doing that was working and share
Yeah.
it with them. And so that's how it started. Was at first
That's
I
how it
thought it was
started.
fitness. I
How
thought it was
cool is
fitness.
that?
I thought fitness was the way that I was going to save the world. I was like,
Yeah.
everybody just needs to move their body more and we're going to be better. And that's true. But
Yeah.
wait, there's more. Everybody needs to learn how to have a balanced, healthy gut so that they can reduce Alzheimer's and dementia and any chronic illness, like, and especially mental health diseases, right? this is what's going to save the world. So I got really hardcore into nutrition. And then I started competing and I was doing fitness competitions and I was weighing all my food and I was working out a couple hours a day and I was doing all these things because I was saving myself.
You're a
But, and
0 to 60 girl.
oh man. And
Wow.
then people were coming up to me and I had a full clientele and I was running this boot camp and I was working with competition clients. And I realized that as people were coming up to me, asking me to work with them around a competition, I started deterring them. And I thought
Yeah.
it's really interesting. And it was the first time I really started to get curious around it because the truth was, I was telling them, they're like, "Oh, Jen, you look amazing. I want to be healthy like you." And I said, "Well,
Hmm.
you have to pick one. You want to look like me or do you want to be healthy?" And it started occurring to me that I hadn't been really paying attention and caring about the fact that I hadn't had a period in 3 years, or that my kidneys were shutting down, or that I was losing my hair, or that I was completely miserable and judging myself every time I looked in the mirror, or that I felt like if I didn't, I was less than. And I thought, what is happening? This isn't why I got into this.
Hmm.
I got into fitness and taking care of myself because I needed it to feel okay, to be okay in my own skin. And yet here I was, not okay in my own skin, constantly judging myself against the girls I was taking second place to because they were willing to do things chemically that I wasn't willing to do to win a plastic trophy on stage. And so, but still, here I am comparing myself to them, feeling less than, not really connecting to what it is that I wanted to be experiencing. Instead, I was comparing myself to what I thought others wanted me to be, holding myself to some standard that the community have built for me that wasn't mine.
So how did you make that turn?
Well,
Because
0 to 60,
now I know
I
what
went to
you do.
zero.
I
I
know. I
stopped
mean, I know what
training.
you're
I
doing.
stopped
Yeah.
working out. I stopped eating clean. I started eating whenever I wanted. I got off my routine. And guess what? I gained 20
That was
pounds, fell
bad.
into a
Yeah.
depression, right? And completely lost myself again. And around, a few months into that, maybe a year,
Hmm.
maybe close to a year of that, I realized that that wasn't it either.
Hmm.
And I finally started to ask myself, I loved working with these clients, but my issue was, I think it's amazing that when I'm there in their face and they're connected to what they're doing and who they're being, that they're doing well. But who are they being the other 23 hours of the day when they get in that
Hmm.
car and go over to Jamba Juice and get a 1200 calorie juice because they deserve it, or they go through McDonald's because they deserve it, or they get in the car to go to work and they feel amazing, but then someone cuts them off and they're ready to chase them down for the next hour. I mean, who are you being when your kid does something that irritates you and you bite their head off because you haven't eaten, because you're dieting, because you think that that's what you need to do to be happy, when no one has ever been happy dieting ever,
No, not that I
right?
know of. I can't
When you're not
imagine.
dieting and you're actually just eating foods that make you feel good, actually feel good, not instant in that moment, not for instant gratification, but actually make your body feel good. When you actually have a relationship with your body that allows you to know when it feels good or doesn't feel good, right? When you are building a relationship with yourself and being able to connect to whether or not you like what you're experiencing or not, I think that oftentimes that is really, that's the first step in the framework, right? And so one thing I've built over the 10 years is this framework. And so it's 6 steps that are strategically placed one after the other because I felt that in order for me to share what has and hasn't worked, I had to make it simple to follow. I had to make it something that I could connect with and that I could align with. And so that's what it is. Is it And
Is
so
that
it
how you
actually made
coined the
that
phrase,
transition.
the lifestyle recovery
Lifestyle
solutions? That
recovery.
yeah,
So
because you're.
lifestyle recovery,
Can you explain that? Because you and I talked a little bit about that. Because it's not a teetotaler thing. It's learning to be in and moderate. I think is what your thoughts and the program of what you promote is, right?
lifestyle recovery for me. So my company name is Lifestyle Recovery Solutions. And the reason that I use the term lifestyle recovery is because we're so quick to do physical therapy or recovery,
Yeah,
or nutrition
I love the
recovery,
name
or
lifestyle recovery. I think that's a
more
very
so commonly known addiction or alcohol recovery.
right.
And the truth is that recovery is a consistent place of healing, right? You're continuing to heal and grow and make better and make whole again. And when it's not just about recovering from the addiction, I truly don't believe it's about addiction. by itself. I
Hmm.
believe that addiction is the symptom. And I believe that the actual issue is disconnection, the inability to be okay with self and be connected to our current experience. We are so constantly either in past trauma
Hmm.
or in future
Well, I
fear.
was thinking about your childhood growing up. Your escape turned into the addiction because you're trying to figure out or get away from the things you couldn't understand.
And people escape all day, every day. When I get clients that come to me because they just can't seem to put the box of Cheez-Its down, guilty sometimes, we get caught in mindlessness
Hmm.
and disconnection without even realizing it. The reason that you sat and watched 3 seasons of that show on Netflix is because you disconnected.
That's an
The reason that you
addiction.
sat there and exactly the reason that you sat there and ate that whole box of cookies was because you disconnected. The reason
Hmm.
that you blew up on your spouse or your child or your best friend was because you disconnected.
Yeah, yeah, so true. And you brought up the Netflix thing. I think that is so. What does it say about us that we look at something and say, "Oh my gosh, it's got 4 seasons. I can binge on that for days or hours."
Because I remember growing up that my escape was books. And I remember I would get in trouble because I'd be up till 2, 3 in the morning reading a book because I was in that world. And that was my first
Hmm.
addiction. And I believe Netflix does that for us with even less effort, right? If
Yeah,
I don't have to tire my eyes and I don't have to turn a
just
page and
goes
I can
from
just
one to
say,
the
yes,
other
I'm
to the
still
other.
watching 4 hours later, you know, then, and I am absolutely guilty of that. When I want to check out and I don't want to do anything, I don't even want to pick up a book, Netflix.
Yeah, and
And,
I thought, I thought
I have to
too
be
that
careful.
yeah, the book reading. I think I read a book a week in prison, and it was I so and I would read at night with the little thing that attached to my book, the little light, and it was like you were just going in your own world. Thank God you had a place to go to get in, away from everything else that was around you. So yeah, I think you're really right on top of that. That is totally just
And, and there are
escaping
benefits
unplugged.
to it.
Sure, there is.
There absolutely are benefits to it. And that's what I consider purposeful
Yeah.
disconnection. There's a big difference between mindlessly killing a box of cookies and actually purposefully running a bath for yourself or turning on Netflix and giving yourself 2 hours
Yeah.
in a
Give
block of
yourself that
time
time.
or whatever,
But
right? It's important that we have white space in our calendar in order to create a sustainable, healthy life of either serving either life or a career of serving others.
I'm curious though, Jen, because I know you when we were you're married, have a husband. How did those personal things start? Like, I'm sure you went into that thinking, I've got all this stuff that I've got to find the right person that gets me. Was that something that by happenstance happened, or was it something? How did
Absolutely.
that all work?
It comes down to continuing to honor what serves you and what doesn't. When I first was released, I knew I didn't want a relationship for a year. I was not going to have a boyfriend for a year because that was what was suggested by everybody, not just AA and NA, by the counselors, by the powers that be, by everybody. Please, Jen, just figure out who you are first. And so
Don't
I
don't get
agreed.
into a relationship, is what they said.
Don't do it. No,
Yeah.
because especially someone like myself who is hardcore empathetic, hardcore codependent, right?
Right.
Who always was a chameleon and would mold herself to whatever it was that you needed so that you loved me and you accepted me.
Yeah.
um, I had to make sure that was my mission. I left rehab with that mission alone, was to be authentic, have solid boundaries, and to continue to seek accountability. Those steps have grown quite a bit as I've learned more and more about myself. But, authenticity was my first goal, the ability
Hmm.
to not only know who I am, but be who I am without apology.
Hmm.
And I was in a relationship. I was in a relationship in a sense. I had a friend that I was friends with, and the conversation came up around being in a relationship, and I made it very clear that that is not something I'm looking for right now. He had the opportunity to go be a DJ in Vegas and didn't want to go because of us. And I said, look, you're my best friend. There's absolutely no way I could ever live with myself if you didn't go take this opportunity. And so he did. And he said, well, before I go, I said, no, because you're going to be a DJ in Vegas. No, not going to happen. I'm not going to worry about that all day, every day. I'm just not going to put myself through that. Absolutely not.
Yeah.
However, over the course of the next year and a half, 2 years, I was there every other weekend and he was down back in Riverside every other weekend. And the last few months we started getting really serious. We started discussing what it would look like for me to have a salon up in Vegas, and we started looking around. And then he came down and let me know that a girl contacted him that he had been messing with a few months prior to that before we got serious, and she's pregnant.
Mm.
And so while this had every opportunity to throw me for the loop that the last one threw me for, I was in a different place. I had
Mm-hmm.
set those boundaries up with myself, knowing that the reason that I'm not doing this is because I'm not putting myself in that situation again. And I was almost proud, even though I was devastated and absolutely heartbroken, because
Right.
while he still wanted to be with me, there was no way that I wasn't going to make him at least try with this woman. Go try, figure it out. They
Mm-hmm.
didn't want to be together, but it wasn't that I wasn't in a place where I wanted kids in my life yet. And that wasn't something, and it wasn't with me. So
Mm-hmm.
why would I put myself through that? I'm too early in my recovery. There's no way. I'm sorry. And I set that boundary and I let him go. And it was one of the hardest things at that point that I had done, because he treated me great other than getting other people pregnant. Right. So I thought.
Right. Just that.
And right, it just goes to show our worth is so low when we first get out and what we think we deserve. But I stood up for myself and I moved on. I met another gentleman who was quite a few years my senior, but we were inseparable. We laughed all the time. We were very well connected. We had a great time together. And honestly, I had no worries about his age. He was about 19 years older than me.
Mm-hmm.
I have always been someone that has dated older, around 10 years older, even from the time I was 14. My boyfriend was 22. I was 15 with a 21-year-old. It's just always been that way because I've always just been more mature, and I just
Mm-hmm.
never found that connection with someone my age. So I thought there's no big deal. He's already had his kids. He's already been married. I don't have to worry about, because I had sworn I was never going to be in a relationship with someone who had young kids, because
Yeah.
my ex did, and that was stolen from me. And
Mm-hmm.
even though I was his stepmom for 4 years, I wasn't allowed to continue to have a relationship with him. And so I set those, there's just certain things I put in place. Like, what is it that I need in this relationship, or that I will are absolute deal breakers? And he was good with that. And because his kids were grown, I didn't have any issues and we had a great time. However, his friend did not understand that I didn't want kids, kept telling him, let that girl go, let her have a family. And eventually, certain things ended up to the point where I had to tell him that it just wasn't going to work out. And I was devastated again. But for the second time, I had to break off something that no longer served me, no matter
Mm-hmm.
how much I loved and cared about him. No matter how much he had bought me, he was the first man ever that, I mean, he had a beach house in Oceanside on the beach. It was his private, beach.
Uh,
And he had,
Easy to
you
stay
know,
around. Yeah.
oh, I've never been taken care of like that. I'd always been the provider in every relationship I was in. And that was hard letting go, because I thought, Jenn, you're a
Yeah.
ex-homeless, convicted felon, drug addict. What are you
Yeah.
thinking?
And here you
Get
are. Yeah.
over it. And I still let him go. And what continuing to do that, and then continuing to move forward with my fitness and my health and working on myself. I met Michael when I was running boot camp, and I was running a boot camp out of a little dojo in the neighborhood. And he had a fighter that he was training. He was doing the functional training with the fighters, and he brought him in right in the middle of my boot camp. And so that led to an interesting introduction to both of us, where I was not thrilled, but I was still, mind you, this handsome, really built man walks in with a younger guy who's also really built and handsome. And he's, walks in, and I just thought, oh, this guy, he must just think he's everything. And he's got these gorgeous green eyes, and he's just so like, I was just like,
Yeah. So
how
stuck
dare
up.
you walk in here? I just woke up. I don't even think I brushed my teeth yet while I'm yelling at these girls. All of us have eye boogers, and we're in our damn near in our pajamas. How dare you walk in here like this? And so, that led to quite a conversation. And we literally have not been able to stop hanging out with each other since. And that was 9 years ago.
9 years
And
ago. That's what I was going to
we
ask
have
you.
it's been a long time, and we've broken up a couple times because there were certain things that I realized, didn't know at the time, but when I realized that they were deal breakers, I made it clear. I
Yeah.
can't do this. If this is how you choose to be, I can't. That's
Just
okay.
good
You're a grown
communication.
man, but
Yeah.
I cannot be that or be there for it. I cannot
Mm-hmm.
support that. I cannot hold space for that. And I removed myself from the situation. We've bought our own home together about 4 years ago now. Time flies.
You're like a real live adult.
I'm grown. Look at me with like a more. No, I don't have a mortgage because we decided to purchase a mobile on a rented piece of property, and so we actually were able to buy the mobile cash. And so I technically have a paid off home, and we're in the middle of renovating it piece by piece, and we've got $100,000 in equity in it already. And I'm just so or equity. I believe that's what the
Yeah,
term is.
equity.
Equity, yeah. And
Ownership.
so we've made 5 times on the house just by living here for a couple of years.
Well, it
And
looks
so, I
cool
mean,
behind me. You look like whatever you've
thank
done.
you. I
Yeah,
love this
very,
charcoal
very
shiplap.
cool.
There's a charcoal
I
shiplap
love
thing on it. I
that.
believe it was at Home Depot,
It's
and
not
I
the
just
white, it's
love it.
dark.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
And just finding things that I love that maybe that isn't great for everybody else, but I'm not trying to impress anybody. I'm trying to create a home that I love. And so,
Oh, I
building
like the
this
shiplap
framework,
being dark. I think that looks cool.
I love it.
Yeah.
Building a framework that I could follow myself so that when I'm off track, I can go back to, hey, what's going on right now? How am I feeling right now? Is this going the way I want or not? And then deciding, okay, well, what do I want? If that's not
Mm-hmm.
it, what do I want? And creating that vision and really embodying that vision. And then being able to recognize where in my life am I out of balance? Where am I giving too much energy? And where could I maybe use a little more, right?
Mm-hmm.
What areas get too much attention and what don't get enough? And then what do I need to be saying yes and no to in order to keep that balance and stay connected and in alignment?
So the
And then am I
coaching and the
being
workshops that you're doing, Jen, is it I mean, you were saying you did like a workshop like once a month, and I guess you're coaching people throughout. And it just seems like you're in a good space with all the. I guess what I mean by good space, you're using all of your experience. I always think this is really cool when people do this. You're using all the experience that you've had from a little girl until now, and you're using that to help people with, to help them get through, because you've learned different strategies that are real strategies. They're not something that you learned about because you read it or you heard it somebody talk about it in a seminar. You've lived it. And I think that's probably what people really get about you helping them, is that everything you're telling them, you've lived through, and you know why it works or why it doesn't work. And I think that's when things really work for people, is you literally embody what you're talking to them about. And I think that's, if you can take all that experience and push that forward and be your passion to help people, that is so cool. I think that's just very cool.
I appreciate that. I
I
definitely
want to ask you a
that
question, Jen.
drives me.
Yeah, and I can see that. And I can see that you've always been somebody that just jumps and swims as fast as you can, or you jump and run as fast as you can. So this seems like you've kind of balanced that into all the different things that and you're pushing it forward, but you're also kind of keeping it balanced, which I think one of the things I was wanting to ask you is, living through all the different things, Jen, that you've lived through, because you've lived such a journey that a lot of times you just, you see this in a Netflix series or a movie, but you've actually lived it. What do you think is the biggest takeaway that you would tell people about your journey and how you got through it or how you survived it?
There's so much there, right? But I would say that when it came down to it, to be true to the only way that I finally started to really be okay was to start honoring myself and my needs. And
Yeah.
my old belief system was that I had to make sure you were okay so that I could be okay. And I had to make sure that I was accepted. And the truth is now is that I don't have to be accepted. Of course, on every level, all of us want to feel that way. But as long as I accept myself,
Mm-hmm.
the rest is just bonus.
And that's the freeing for you. You're actually freeing yourself from all that.
Absolutely.
As long as you're okay with yourself, yes, you still want adoration, or you want somebody to like your stuff or whatever that is, but you don't have to have it as long as you're good with yourself.
100%.
I like that. I like that a lot. I mean, that's deep because it hits on so many layers and levels. But if you can get to that point where you're comfortable with that, it's good for me. I'm good with myself. I don't care what else happens. And you're working your passion, which fills you up,
Yeah.
which is great. Good stuff. Good stuff, Jen. What a great guest. Are you working on a book?
I am actually. It's not the autobio, but it is a thought leader book. And I will be sharing that framework I talked about because it needs to be out there. And I run the masterclass all the time. This is something that I do work with my clients around, but it's really something I feel like it needs to be out there on a bookshelf, on a Kindle, on
Yeah.
Audible. I
Yeah.
need people to understand what lifestyle recovery means, that it is possible to have personal freedom, that it is possible to be okay in your own skin, that it is possible to say no without feeling guilty and to be able to create a life that you love, full of abundance instead of scarcity, and not needing to have to prove yourself to every Tom, Dick, and Harry that comes around the corner telling you how you're supposed to be. And we are so influenced. I mean, we're literally paying people to influence us on social media now, right? And
Which, by the way, you have a
they,
good Instagram account. What's your Instagram called? How did it get you on Instagram? Because you're funny
my
too on there.
my first or my personal is Fit Mind Body and Spirit, and
Yeah.
I'm sure you can share that on the information, but it's the letter N instead of and, so Fit Mind Body Spirit. And then I
Mm-hmm.
also have a professional page that's not as much fun, but I'm working with my VA around bringing in reels from other mental health professionals and other wellness professionals so that I can share their information, because I see
I
gold
like that.
all day long and there's no reason why I shouldn't be sharing their information so other
Yeah.
people will follow these inspirations as well.
Yeah.
And so that is Lifestyle Recovery Solutions. There are underscores between the words, and yeah, Lifestyle Recovery Solutions.
That's great. And if anybody's looking, I actually wrote a book, so you guys can look and wait for Jen's book. But mine's out. It's Nightmare Success. Everybody, if you want to subscribe to the show, if you go to Spotify, you hit the little bell. If you go to Apple, there's a little 3 lines up there, and you hit follow. The reviews, love a review. That's great. Love the feedback. You want to leave me a message on BrentCassidy.com. Love answering and talking, seeing what the questions are. As I used to say when I was writing my emails back when I was at Leavenworth, stay strong. I'll do the same. And Jenn, thank you for being my guest today. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
Nightmare Success, in and out. Thanks for being here today.